If you've been watching my channel for any amount of time, you probably know that I'm kind of obsessed with dinosaurs. I mean, who isn't, right? Giant reptiles, sharp teeth, tiny arms, what's not to love? But here's the thing that blows my mind every single time I think about it. Dinosaurs, for all their fame and glory, weren't even the first terrifying creatures to dominate this planet. Not even close, actually. Before the terrible lizards showed up to the party, Earth was already hosting some of the most nightmarish, bizarre, and frankly disturbing animals you could possibly imagine. And I'm not exaggerating. Some of them make the T-Rex look tame. One had 5 eyes, another was the length of a car, and one was basically a saber-toothed almost mammal. So naturally, this got me thinking, what exactly were these pre-dinosaur monsters? What kind of absolute units were stomping around before the Mesozoic even began? And let me tell you, the rabbit hole I fell down while researching this topic was deep. So deep that at multiple points I had to stop and ask myself if what I was looking at was actually real or if someone was just messing with paleontologists for fun. Spoiler alert, it was all real. Horrifyingly, beautifully real. You'll probably laugh, scream, and wonder how none of this is taught in school. And at least once, you'll say, that cannot be real. Let's start our journey way back, and I mean way back, to a time period that doesn't get nearly enough love, the Cambrian period, roughly 500 million years ago. And during this era, the oceans were home to what I can only describe as a nightmare scenario given physical form. Enter Opabinia, a creature so bizarre that when it was first presented at a scientific conference in the early 1970s, the audience literally burst out laughing because they thought it was a joke. I'm not making this up. Actual scientists looked at this reconstruction and went, okay, who's pranking us? And the wildest part? The reconstruction turned out to be right. And honestly, I get it. Because Opabinia looks like what you'd get if a toddler tried to draw an alien, and evolution said, yeah, let's make that real. Ready for the checklist? This thing had 5 eyes. Not 2, not 4, but 5 stalked eyes arranged across its head like some kind of organic security camera system. And if that wasn't weird enough, it also had a flexible proboscis, basically a vacuum cleaner hose attached to its face, that ended in a set of spines it used to grab prey and shove it into its mouth, which was located underneath its head. Because why not, right? At about 5 to 7 centimeters, 2 to 3 inches long, Opabinia wasn't exactly a giant, but what it lacked in size, it made up for in pure, concentrated weirdness. It swam along the ocean floor using lateral lobes, basically little flappy fins running down both sides of its body, while its 5 eyes scanned for food, and that bizarre trunk grabbed anything edible it could find. What makes Opabinia even more fascinating is that when scientists first discovered its fossils in the famous Burgess Shale, they had absolutely no idea what they were looking at or where to classify it. It didn't fit into any known group of animals. Was it related to arthropods? Maybe? Sort of? No one could agree. It took decades of study before paleontologists finally accepted that, yes, this ridiculous-looking creature actually existed. And yes, it really did have 5 eyes and a trunk mouth. The Cambrian period was just that wild. And get this, for over a century, scientists thought Opabinia was completely unique, a one-of-a-kind freak of nature. Until 2022, when a fossil from Utah called Arthropleura comosa was reclassified as the second known Opabiniid, published in Proceedings B. So yes, that weird weirdo had a cousin. 100 years for one cousin. That's how rare Deep Times receipts are. Now let's leave the water. Things get bigger, but as terrifying as ocean monsters were, the real party didn't start until life decided to, actually leave the water. And this is where things get wild. Because once you hit the late Carboniferous and early Permian periods, you're looking at a world that would make even the most hardened dinosaur enthusiast go, wait, what? Let me paint you a picture. It's roughly 300 million years ago. The first forests are starting to appear, oxygen levels are through the roof, like dangerously high levels we're talking about here, and evolution is basically throwing darts at a board to see what sticks, and what stuck was, well, let's just say it was interesting. First up, we've got Arthropleura. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's a weird name, what is it? Well, imagine a millipede. Got that image in your head? Good. Now make it nearly the length of a small car. Imagine that, a bug as long as your car, crawling through ancient swamps. Burn the neighborhood? Maybe, but it probably just ate leaf litter. Most conservative estimates put Arthropleura at around 2 meters in length, with the largest estimates around 2.6 to 2.7 meters, or about 8.5 to 8.9 feet, and roughly 50 kilograms, based on a 2018 find near Howick Bay, described in 2021. This absolute unit was the largest known terrestrial arthropod, or land invertebrate, of all time, and it scuttled around the Carboniferous forests, likely a detritivore, decaying plants, leaf litter. But gut-jaw evidence is sparse. And here's the kicker. We're still not entirely sure how this thing got so massive. Carboniferous oxygen peaked near 30 to 35% compared to today's 21%, which probably helped arthropod gigantism, though the Howick specimen sits in layers with only slightly elevated oxygen. So oxygen wasn't the whole story. So yes, more oxygen helped, but something else was in play. Paleontologists also think lack of competition, climate, and habitat played roles. But honestly, we still don't fully understand why it got so big. And just to make things even more interesting, in 2024, literally last year, researchers described juvenile Arthropleura heads for the first time ever, published in Science Advances. And what they found was wild. This thing had a mix of millipede and centipede traits, suggesting that the evolutionary split between those groups is way trickier than we thought. Science is still evolving on this one, but giant millipedes are honestly just the appetizer. The main course of pre-dinosaur horror has to be the apex predators of the Permian period. And I'm not talking about some early dinosaur precursor or anything remotely reptilian. No. I'm talking about something far weirder. Something that technically shares more in common with you and me than it does with dinosaurs. Time to meet our side of the family. Plot twist. The pre-dinosaur apex predators are on our side of the family tree. I'm talking about synapsids. Wait, what's a synapsid? I hear you asking. Well, buckle up, because this is where it gets interesting. Synapsids are basically the evolutionary line that eventually led to mammals. Yeah, we're their descendants. Which means that technically, our ancient relatives were the apex predators before dinosaurs came along and stole the spotlight. And the king of these proto-mammal predators? That honor goes to Dimetrodon. Now, you might be thinking, oh yeah, Dimetrodon, the dinosaur with the sail on its back. And congratulations, you've just made every paleontologist in the world simultaneously cry. Because here's the thing that drives experts absolutely bonkers. Dimetrodon is not a dinosaur. In fact, it's more closely related to you than it is to a T-Rex. It's a synapsid, a proto-mammal, and it went extinct a full 40 million years before the first dinosaur even showed up. But man, was Dimetrodon cool. This apex predator lived during the early Permian, roughly 295 to 272 million years ago, and different species ranged from about 1.7 to 4.6 meters in length. That's roughly 5.5 to 15 feet. And that iconic sail on its back? Most scientists think thermoregulation played a role, but sexual display is also debated, likely a mix of functions. Genius, if it's a radiator, or a billboard, if it's for show. Either way, it worked. And speaking of chomping, this thing had some seriously impressive teeth. Multiple types, actually, which is where it gets its name. Dimetrodon literally means 2 measures of teeth. It had these massive canine-like teeth for killing, along with smaller teeth for processing food. Sound familiar? Yeah, it's basically the same setup we mammals use today. Convergent evolution at its finest. Or more accurately, these guys pioneered it first, and we just kept the good bits. But if you think Dimetrodon is weird, oh buddy, let me introduce you to its contemporary and fellow apex predator, Gorgonopsids. Now, these things are where evolution really said, let's get creative with the nightmare fuel. Gorgonopsids were synapsids that lived during the late Permian period, and they were basically what would happen if you took a saber-toothed cat, made it slightly more reptilian, and then cranked up the terror factor to 11. The name Gorgonopsid comes from the Gorgons of Greek mythology. You know, the ones with snake hair who turned people to stone. And honestly, that's pretty appropriate, because if I saw one of these things running at me, I'd probably freeze in terror too. These creatures had massive saber-like canine teeth that could grow up to about 12 centimeters long in some species, with some estimates even larger, and they weren't dainty about using them either. Evidence suggests these guys were ambush predators who would charge out from cover and deliver absolutely devastating bites to their prey. Different Gorgonopsids varied in size. The biggest, like Inostrancevia, are usually estimated around 3 to 3.5 meters, with upper canines up to about 12 centimeters. Think about that for a second. Before dinosaurs, before mammals really took off, these weird proto-mammal reptile things were dominating the landscape. And they were good at it too, lasting for millions of years until the great Permian extinction came along and basically hit the reset button on life. Then the planet rolled the dice, and everything changed. Oh right, I should probably mention that. The Permian period ended with the single worst mass extinction event in Earth's history. We're talking about the Permian Triassic extinction, affectionately known as the Great Dying, which is metal as hell but also deeply concerning. This event wiped out roughly 90 to 96% of marine species and about 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species. It was so catastrophic that it took millions of years for life to recover. And when it did, the world was completely different. But before that happened, let me tell you about one more absolutely bonkers creature that exemplifies just how weird the pre-dinosaur world really was. Say hello to Estemmenosuchus, which translates to crowned crocodile, though calling it a crocodile is doing both crocodiles and this creature a massive disservice. Estemmenosuchus was another synapsid. This time a herbivore that roamed what is now Russia during the Middle Permian, roughly 267 million years ago. And it looked like someone started designing a hippopotamus, got bored halfway through, and decided to add a bunch of weird bony horns and protrusions all over its skull for absolutely no reason. I'm talking horns above the eyes, horns on the cheeks, knobs on the snout. This thing's head looked like a geological formation. And the best part? Scientists still aren't entirely sure what these bizarre decorations were for. Territorial display? Mating? Fighting rivals? Just for fun? Who knows? Evolution was clearly just experimenting at this point. This chunky herbivore could reach lengths of over 3 meters, or about 10 feet, with a skull length of around 65 centimeters, and it roamed around munching on plants and probably making weird sounds. We don't know what it sounded like. I'm voting angry honk. Now, I could go on and on about pre-dinosaur creatures because there are so many more. We haven't even touched on Titanophonius, the Titanic murderer, which is exactly as terrifying as it sounds, or Scutosaurus, which looked like someone tried to build a tank out of meat and bone, or the absolutely bonkers Kazia, which was basically a barrel with legs, and is somehow also related to us. The Permian period was wild, folks. But here's what really gets me about all of these creatures. For the longest time, when people thought about prehistoric life, it was all dinosaurs, all the time. Dinosaurs in movies, dinosaurs in museums, dinosaurs on lunchboxes. And don't get me wrong, dinosaurs absolutely deserve the hype. But these pre-dinosaur monsters, they've been criminally overlooked. These were the pioneers, the trailblazers, the OG apex predators that figured out how to dominate on land before dinosaurs even existed. They experimented with body plans that seem absolutely ridiculous to us now. They survived in environments that were radically different from anything we know today. And perhaps most importantly, they were our ancestors. Well, if you're a mammal reading this, which I'm assuming you are, unless dolphins have finally learned to use YouTube, in which case, welcome. The synapsids, these weird proto-mammal creatures, are directly in our evolutionary lineage, which means that somewhere in your deep, deep, deep ancestry, you're related to something that looked like Dimetrodon or a Gorgonopsid. And honestly, that's pretty cool. Your great-great-great insert about 10 million more greats here. Grandparent might have been an apex predator with a giant sail on its back. How many people can say that about dinosaurs? None, because dinosaurs aren't our ancestors. We win this round, reptiles. But the story of these pre-dinosaur monsters also serves as a pretty sobering reminder about extinction. Every single creature I've talked about today, Opabinia, Arthropleura, Dimetrodon, the Gorgonopsids, Estemmenosuchus, all of them is gone, extinct. wiped out either by environmental changes, competition, or in the case of the Permian creatures, the single worst disaster in the history of complex life on Earth. The Great Dying was so catastrophic that it fundamentally reshaped what life looked like on this planet. The dominant synapsids were mostly wiped out, though it's worth noting that some advanced therapsid lineages did manage to survive into the Triassic period, where they coexisted with early dinosaurs for a time. But their age of dominance was over. In their place, a new group began to rise. The archosaurs, which would eventually give rise to dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and modern crocodilians. And here's the really crazy part. This could happen again. Maybe not a Permian-level extinction event, hopefully not, but the point is that dominance is temporary. The creatures I've talked about today ruled for tens of millions of years. They were the undisputed champions of their ecosystems. And then, relatively quickly in geological terms, they were gone, replaced by something new. It makes you wonder what might come after us, doesn't it? I mean, humans have only been around for a cosmic eye blink compared to how long some of these creatures ruled. If we disappeared tomorrow, what would take our place? Would it be something completely new, or would an existing lineage finally get its chance to shine? Would rats evolve into something terrifying? Would octopuses take over? Would dolphins finally reveal they've been intelligent all along and just playing dumb? The possibilities are both exciting and mildly terrifying. But I digress. The point is, the pre-dinosaur world was filled with creatures that were every bit as impressive, terrifying, and fascinating as any dinosaur. They deserve way more recognition than they get. So the next time someone shows you a picture of Dimetrodon and calls it a dinosaur, you can smugly correct them and explain that actually, it's a synapsid and more closely related to mammals. You'll be fun at parties, I promise. Maybe. Okay, probably not. But at least you'll be factually correct. And that's what really matters. Thanks for watching. And remember, before dinosaurs stole the spotlight, monsters were already headlining. Monsters headlined long before lizards, five-eyed vacuum creatures, car-sized millipedes, and saber-toothed proto-mammals with sails on their backs. And honestly, I think that's beautiful.